Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 48 minutes before the Pentagon helicopter landed on the roof of St. Michael's. He didn't know who he was talking to. Neither did anyone else. The story begins 3 months earlier in Atlanta, where Ashley Cooper moves through the sterile corridors of St. Michael's with practiced invisibility. Fluorescent lights wash over her in waves as she changes bedpans, checks vitals, documents fluid intake with the precision of someone who has done this before in places where mistakes meant body bags. She's been a civilian nurse here for exactly 92 days, unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of competent nobody that hospitals run on. Her credentials are perfect. Her references are pristine. Her history is a fabrication built by naval intelligence across 4 states. In the break room, she keeps a tarnished military challenge coin in her locker, pulled from wreckage in Kandahar in 2019. It's the size of a quarter, dented from shrapnel, the eagle barely visible beneath oxidized silver. She runs her thumb over it during breaks, a small ritual that steadies her pulse. A tremor appears in her left hand only when she's alone, a physical reminder of the field hospital at Bagram, of 18-hour surgeries, of blood she couldn't wash away. In public, her hands are granite. Dr. Marcus Caldwell is 53 years old, wears a Rolex worth more than Ashley's car, and has never lost a power struggle in his department. His voice carries the weight of someone who has spent 2 decades training people to flinch. His network runs deep, for board members owe him favors, a medical supply company cuts him checks on the quiet, and he has the kind of institutional immunity that comes from being useful to people who matter. He's built his career on knowing exactly which patients to treat and which ones to discard. When the blind Army Ranger arrives from Bagram on a Tuesday morning in July, the hospital receives him like a deportation. His name is lost in the paperwork. His condition is documented in clinical language that translates to difficult, expensive, unlikely to pay. Shrapnel-induced blindness. Cardiac arrhythmias. Complex trauma. He is 26 years old and has no one. Ashley watches from the nurse's station as Dr. Caldwell personally turns him away in the ER at 6:11 a.m. The Ranger is still on the stretcher, still semi-conscious from transport sedation. Caldwell doesn't examine him. Doesn't review his imaging. Doesn't ask questions. He simply reads the intake sheet, glances at the patient's military insurance designation, the kind that pays 40 cents on the dollar, and says the words with the confidence of someone who has never been questioned. We don't have the resources. Refer him to the VA in Decatur. The Ranger is transferred before breakfast. But something doesn't align. A referral gets made. The VA calls back within 2 hours, bed available, inbound transport approved. Except Decatur is 30 miles away, and the transport driver takes a wrong turn, 30 minutes of delay that becomes an hour. The Ranger's heart goes into atrial fibrillation during that drive. He arrives at St. Michael's instead, back through the same ER doors. This time, Dr. Caldwell is waiting. I thought I discharged him. Incoming transfer, sir. He crashed in the. Not my service. Not my patient. Who admitted him? The resident's name gets noted. A mental flag gets planted. Dr. Caldwell walks away. The Ranger stays anyway because his vital signs are too unstable to move. He occupies a bed in the cardiology ward, a problem that needs solving. Over the next 48 hours, Ashley watches the machinery of institutional indifference operate like something with its own metabolism. A cardiologist evaluates him at 10:15 a.m., reviews the chart, reviews the insurance designation, and says, complex case. I'd recommend a second opinion. By 3:22 p.m., that cardiologist's nurse has called 6 other specialists with the same referral offer. Each one takes the bait. Each one reads those 3 words, veterans insurance, complex cardiac, resource constraints, and declines. By Wednesday afternoon, 9 doctors have formally refused the case in writing. Liability concerns. Resource constraints. Recommended transfer to specialized facilities. The language is professional. The message is clear: this man is not worth the liability exposure. This man's insurance doesn't justify the risk. Ashley counts them because that's what she does. Her brain catalogues numbers, patterns, evidence. 9 refusals over 48 hours. The ranger lies in bed 17, blind, alone, his heart rate irregular on the monitor, and the hospital moves around him like water around stone. The 10th refusal is the one that changes everything. Dr. Caldwell stands in the nurse's station at 11:34 a.m. on Wednesday, drinking coffee from a ceramic mug that says Chief of Cardiology, and announces his decision to the entire staff. The room has 10 nurses, 3 residents, 1 attending physician, and the morning light cutting through the windows at an angle that makes everyone look slightly haunted. The ranger in 17 needs to transfer today. I'm calling his case unsustainable. No one speaks. The fluorescent lights hum above them, that low electrical drone that seems to tunnel into your brain after 8 hours of shift. A monitor beeps somewhere down the hall. The ventilator in 17 wheezed through its mechanical breath, audible even from where Ashley stands. The insurance doesn't justify the complexity. The VA has better resources for his specific presentation. That's my final recommendation. Ashley feels something shift in her chest. Not fear. Not hesitation. Something older and more dangerous. Something that knows exactly what to do when 10 powerful people align to abandon one vulnerable person. Something that has been trained to recognize when the machinery of institutional power is about to grind someone into nothing. She steps forward. I'll take him. The room goes dead silent. Dr. Caldwell's coffee cup pauses halfway to his lips. His eyes move toward her with the kind of casual disdain usually reserved for staff who have failed to refill the supply closet. I'm sorry, who are you? Ashley Cooper. I'm willing to take his case as his primary nurse. That's not how this works. Medical decisions require physician oversight. I understand. I'm asking for the opportunity to coordinate his care under your supervision, Dr. Caldwell. The language comes out soft and deferential, exactly the performance she's perfected over 92 days. The civilian nurse who knows her place. The competent staff member who doesn't overstep. The person with nothing remarkable about her except steady hands and a willingness to work the cases nobody else wants. Caldwell smiles. It's the smile of someone who has just been handed an instrument for a demonstration of power. You want to take him? You think you're going to solve cardiac complications that have declined? He sets his mug down with precision. I'll make you a bet, Ms. Cooper. You take this case. You manage this ranger with whatever resources you think you can access. And I predict you'll walk away within 1 week. You'll realize the futility, the liability, the unsustainability of it all. He pauses. The smile doesn't waver. 1 week. Then you'll understand why the answer is no. He walks away before she can respond. The nurses return to their charts. The residents scatter. The monitor continues its irregular beep from room 17. Ashley stands in the center of the nurses' station with her jaw tightened in a way that no one else recognizes as anything other than nervous tension. That night, she drives home to her apartment, a sparse 2-bedroom in Buckhead with nothing personal on the walls, designed to be vacated in 72 hours if necessary. She fills a glass with water and grips the edge of the sink until her knuckles go white, until the blood stops flowing to her fingertips. Her left hand trembles. She closes her eyes and counts backward from 10 in Pashto, a habit from Bagram, from the field hospital where trembling hands killed people. By the time she reaches 0, her hands are steady again. The next morning, she arrives early and reviews the ranger's full medical history. 2 tours with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines before he transferred to the Army Rangers. The shrapnel entered through the left orbital socket. The blindness is permanent. The cardiac component is secondary damage, shockwave-induced myocardial contusion, healing irregularly, creating arrhythmia that nobody wants to manage because it's unpredictable. Dangerous. Exactly the kind of case that requires someone with nothing to lose. Caldwell finds her 2 days later in the supply room and doesn't even pretend to have a medical reason for the visit. He walks in while she's organizing sterile dressing kits and knocks the cafeteria tray from her hands. Food scatters across the tile floor, apple slices, sandwich, yogurt cup. The tray clatters with a sound like gunfire in the quiet hallway. "Oops," he says. Then he throws a chart at her feet. "Pick that up, sweetheart." He walks away before she responds. Before she can do anything except stand there with gravity and institutional power arrayed against her like weather. The apple slices sit on the tile floor. A yogurt container leaks slowly. She can feel the nursing staff watching from their stations, ready to see how she breaks. She doesn't break. She crouches down and retrieves the papers, each one, methodically. Her hands don't shake. Her breathing doesn't quicken. Her face shows nothing at all, just the neutral expression of someone completing a task that has been assigned to her. "Thank you for the reminder, Dr. Caldwell," she says quietly. He's already gone. On Friday morning, the veteran orderly who works the medical floors, a man named Garrett, 34, Marine Corps tattoo on his neck from Ramadi, watches her perform wound irrigation on the Ranger. She's using a specific technique, something called the low-pressure stream method, something that requires knowing exactly how hard the saline needs flow without causing tissue damage. Something that requires military medical training. Garrett's eyes narrow. He's seen that technique before, deployed it himself in the field. After she finishes, he pulls her aside in the hallway. "That's a combat medic's technique," he says quietly. "You serve in Kandahar." Ashley feels the moment crystallize, the instant where her cover could fracture if she answers wrong. She smiles politely, the soft nurse smile, the civilian smile. "I trained with some very good teachers," she says. "The best ones taught me to never stop learning." Garrett studies her for a moment longer, then nods and walks away. He doesn't push. He doesn't ask for more. Maybe he knows something. Maybe he recognizes the particular kind of calm that comes from having survived things that most people don't survive. That night, she sits in her apartment and places the tarnished challenge coin on the coffee table. The metal catches the light. The eagle is barely visible through the oxidation, but it's there, a reminder of Kandahar, of the field hospital, of hands that have held lives together while everything else fell apart. Tomorrow the real crisis arrives. Tomorrow the Ranger's heart will move toward something worse than irregularity. Tomorrow, at 2:07 a.m., he'll code in his sleep and the on-call physician will be 20 minutes away, and Ashley will stand in that room and remember that she was trained by people whose names she will never speak to anyone, and that the real measure of a warrior isn't what you do when the world is watching. It's what you do when the world stops watching and you're the only person left who knows how to save a life. Dr. Caldwell's eyes narrowed the moment Ashley stepped forward, and for half a second something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or the brief recognition that his easy dismissal had been challenged. He straightened from the nurse's station, moving with the casual confidence of a man who had never once doubted his position in a room, and leaned against the polished edge with theatrical amusement. His fingers drummed once against the counter, a deliberate gesture meant to draw attention. "Tell you what, Nurse Cooper," he announced, his voice projecting across the entire station loud enough that 2 residents and 4 nurses turned to listen, "I'll bet you $1,000 you quit this case within a week." He paused, letting the weight of the wager settle. "Hell, I'll make it interesting. You last 7 days with our blind hero, and I'll personally apologize in front of the board. A full public apology. My reputation on the line." The silence that followed was the kind that doctors create when they're testing the boundaries of their power. Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the staff, the uncomfortable sound of people watching dominoes fall. A resident who had been charting looked up and then quickly back down. The charge nurse's jaw tightened slightly. Everyone in that room understood the architecture of what was happening. This wasn't a wager. This was a public declaration that Ashley Cooper was about to fail, and that her failure would be witnessed by every person standing there. Ashley's face remained perfectly neutral. Her hands, holding the Ranger's chart, stayed absolutely still. When she spoke, her voice was steady, pitched just above a whisper so that Caldwell would have to strain slightly to hear her acknowledgement, an inversion of power disguised as deference. I'll take good care of him, doctor. Nothing more. No confirmation of the bet, no agreement, no defiance. Just a simple statement of intent delivered with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived worse. Caldwell's smile tightened at the corners. He'd expected pushback or capitulation, something he could work with. Instead, he'd gotten ice water. He turned away, already calculating his next move, already understanding at some primal level that the woman standing in front of him was not going to break the way he'd planned. The afternoon brought the first deliberate test. Ashley carried her lunch tray through the cafeteria at 12:06 p.m., moving through the fluorescent-lit space with the kind of invisible competence that people with military training develop, efficient, unobtrusive, leaving no room for vulnerability. Caldwell was seated at a table with 3 attending physicians, engaged in loud conversation about an upcoming golf tournament. As Ashley passed, he suddenly stood, creating a collision that appeared accidental to anyone not watching closely. Her lunch tray crashed downward with the sound of ceramic shattering against tile, soup spreading across the floor in a scalding orange bloom, a roll tumbling across the linoleum like it was fleeing the scene. "Oh Christ, I'm so sorry," Caldwell said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Watch where you're going, would you?" He dropped a patient chart at her feet with exaggerated care, letting it fall from waist height so the papers scattered. "Pick that up, sweetheart. Nurses need to learn to watch where they're going." The words were delivered with a smile, the kind that men use when they know they can say anything because the power structure protects them. 2 attending physicians carefully studied their plates. A nurse at the adjacent table turned her chair slightly, creating distance. Ashley's jaw clenched once, hard enough that a muscle jumped in her cheek, visible and then controlled. Her hands moved toward the floor without hesitation, fingers reaching for the scattered papers with the same precision she'd use for a surgical tray. No trembling. No hesitation. No audible breath. Just the mechanical action of a person retrieving what had been thrown down, her face showing nothing at all. "Of course, doctor," she said quietly, gathering the pages, stacking them in the correct order without looking up at him. The medical charts organized themselves in her hands like she'd rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times. "I'll be more careful." Caldwell watched for a moment, waiting for something, a crack, a tremor, some indication that his strategy was working, and when he found nothing, he simply turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing across the tile in a rhythm that sounded like confidence. The room remained silent until someone finally cleared their throat. Ashley stood, the reorganized chart held against her chest, and walked out of the cafeteria without finishing her lunch. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't acknowledge the stares. She simply moved through the space the way water moves around a stone, taking the path of least resistance while remaining fundamentally unchanged. That night at 11:34 p.m., alone in her apartment in a quiet neighborhood off Peachtree Street, Ashley stood at her bathroom sink and gripped the edge hard enough that her knuckles went white, the porcelain cold beneath her palms. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the practiced composure still there, but underneath it, visible only to herself, something else. A tremor had developed in her left hand, small enough that it might have been invisible to someone who wasn't trained to recognize the physical manifestations of controlled adrenaline. Her breathing was even, but her eyes had narrowed into something that looked like a predator calculating distance and angles. She released the sink slowly, watching her reflection, and then held her left hand steady by force of will alone. The tremor stopped. By the time she moved away from the mirror, there was no evidence that anything had changed at all. The next morning at 6:18 a.m., an orderly named Marcus, who had served with the 75th Ranger Regiment before a knee injury ended his career, watched Ashley perform a complex wound irrigation on the Ranger's chest trauma from the doorway. She moved with the kind of economical precision that only combat medics develop, every gesture calculated to minimize pain and maximize efficiency. The way she held the syringe, the angle of her approach, the pattern of her movements, it was all wrong for a civilian nurse. It was exactly right for someone who had done this under fire. Marcus wheeled a supply cart closer, ostensibly to organize the 4 kits, but really to watch. He'd seen enough military medicine in his own life to recognize it when he encountered it. He whispered low, meant for her ears only, keeping his voice below the ambient sound of the hospital, monitors beeping, ventilators breathing their mechanical rhythm, voices calling down the hallway. That's a combat medic's technique. You serve in Kandahar. Ashley's smile appeared like she'd practiced it in a mirror, polite and distant. She didn't pause in her work, the needle steady as a surgical laser. I trained with good teachers, she said, continuing the procedure without breaking rhythm, without hesitation, without acknowledgement of what he'd just offered, which was brotherhood. A recognition between two people who had lived in the spaces between life and death and understood that some skills couldn't be taught in a classroom. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, really studied it, and then he simply nodded and walked away. Some things didn't need confirmation. Some things, once you'd recognized them, you simply understood and kept to yourself. That night, he wouldn't mention it to anyone. The next day, when he saw Caldwell scheming with board members, he'd find reasons to be in different areas of the hospital. He'd already decided whose side he was on, and it wasn't the doctor's. But that wasn't the worst part. Not by a long measure. By the third day, Dr. Caldwell had begun his real campaign, the kind that operates in the spaces where official oversight can't reach. At 2:11 p.m., he called a private meeting with 4 hospital board members in the administration wing, a carpeted space that smelled like expensive coffee and the kind of leather that costs more than most people's cars. These were men who had benefited significantly from his medical supply arrangement, a scheme so elegant in its simplicity that it had gone undetected for 6 years. Every veteran case came through St. Michael's with insurance that paid approximately 60% of market rate for medical supplies. But Caldwell approved orders for equipment at triple the standard price, with kickbacks flowing back to board members as consulting fees for various phantom companies. It was profitable enough that it had created a network of complicity that extended across the entire administrative structure. Ashley's sudden competence with the Ranger threatened something more dangerous than professional pride. It threatened the billing patterns themselves. A well-treated veteran who recovered quickly might trigger follow-up reviews. Scrutiny invited audit. Audit meant investigation. Investigation meant federal charges for everyone in that room. "I'm concerned about Nurse Cooper's credentials," Caldwell said, settling into a leather chair that made a soft sound as his weight distributed across it. "Something feels off. Did anyone verify her nursing school transcripts? Georgia Tech or wherever she claims?" He let that question hang like bait. We can't afford liability with a high-profile veteran case. 2 of the board members exchanged glances. The third, a man named Harrison with silver hair and the kind of tan that comes from vacation homes in Cabo, leaned forward. "You're saying she's not qualified?" "I'm saying we should verify she actually is," Caldwell replied, which was technically true and structurally a lie. He didn't need verification. He needed doubt. He needed a pretext. By the time he finished that meeting, he'd extracted a commitment from all 4 board members to begin a routine credentialing audit, a process that would take approximately 7 business days and would focus specifically on finding inconsistencies in Ashley's background. And he'd already made a phone call to a credentialing investigator named Hendricks who had done similar work before and owed him money. Meanwhile, downstairs in room 412, Ashley worked 12-hour shifts with the Ranger, changing dressings on wounds that still carried traces of Afghan dust and the chemical burns of IED shrapnel. She monitored his cardiac status, watching the monitors for the kind of arrhythmia that could signal complications she was trained to recognize and trained to prevent. She spoke softly about Atlanta weather and the Braves lineup while his blindness isolated him in a darkness that seemed to deepen every time she left the room. And in the quiet moments between vitals checks, she noticed things. The medical supply charges on his chart were flagrantly inflated. A 16-gauge central line charged at $847 when market rate was $198. Imaging studies ordered but never performed, billed as if they had been. 3 different catheters marked as urgent replacements when the originals were perfectly functional. It was the kind of pattern that only someone trained in military procurement and supply chain accountability would notice immediately. Everyone else saw it as normal hospital billing. Ashley saw it as the crime scene it actually was. At 11:22 p.m. on her 3rd night shift, she stood in a supply closet while the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune, and she photographed 3 pages from the ranger's chart with a phone that had an encrypted contact saved only as handler. Her hands were steady. The pictures were sharp and time-stamped and included enough contextual data to be irrefutable. She texted them without commentary and then deleted the encrypted message from her phone. By morning, the photographs would be in a federal database with her handler's name attached. By afternoon, a preliminary investigation would open. But Caldwell wouldn't know that yet. What Caldwell did know, by 9:51 a.m. on the 4th day, was that he'd found his opening. He'd reviewed Ashley's fabricated nursing school references and discovered exactly what he'd been looking for, a Georgia area code on what was supposed to be a Florida nursing school transcript. A small inconsistency. Barely noticeable. Completely explainable to anyone not looking for a reason to destroy someone's career. But to the credentialing investigator Caldwell called that same afternoon, it was more than enough. "I found something," Caldwell said into the phone, his voice carrying the false concern of a man performing ethics. "I need a full audit of her documentation. Everything. I'm not comfortable until we verify her actual qualifications." The trap was being set with precision. All the pieces were in motion. Dr. Caldwell had no idea that the woman he was trying to break was currently photographing evidence of federal crimes. And Ashley had no idea that the credentialing investigator was already compiling a file meant to have her escorted from the hospital within 72 hours. The room went dead silent. Both of them, in their different ways, were preparing for war. By day 3 with the Ranger, Ashley understood the calculus. Dr. Caldwell had moved past mockery into something far more dangerous, institutional weaponization. The public humiliation in the cafeteria had been a test, and her refusal to break had apparently confirmed his suspicion that she wouldn't fold under simple pressure. So he'd shifted tactics entirely. Strategic. Methodical. The kind of campaign that looked like standard hospital procedure to anyone watching from the outside, but which Ashley recognized immediately as a coordinated operation designed to isolate her from her patient and collapse her credibility in a single clean move. She noticed it first when she went to order the Ranger's wound care supplies on Tuesday afternoon. The hospital procurement system flagged her request with a new policy notation that hadn't existed 48 hours earlier. Dr. Caldwell had implemented mandatory physician authorization for all specialized dressing orders on patients with complex trauma injuries. It was theoretically reasonable, oversight, protocol, patient safety, the language was impeccable. But it meant Ashley couldn't order the materials the Ranger needed without Caldwell's personal approval. She'd have to wait. Ask. Present her case to the man who'd publicly announced he wanted her gone. That same morning, a memo circulated from nursing administration reassigning Ashley to rotate through 3 other units over the next 2 weeks. Floor coverage, the memo claimed. Staffing adjustments. Nothing permanent. The timing was exquisite. Start that rotation, and she'd see the Ranger maybe twice a week. The connection would fray. Her knowledge of his condition would fragment across shift changes and other nurses filling the gaps. By the time she tried to provide continuity of care, there would be a documented pattern of inconsistency that would look like incompetence. Ashley printed the memo and set it on the break room counter without changing her expression, though her hands moved slowly, deliberately, avoiding any sign of the calculation running beneath her composure. She'd dealt with asymmetric pressure before. In Kandahar, it had looked like coordinated militia attacks. Here it looked like hospital administration, which was actually more dangerous because the weapons were invisible and the blame always fell on the person who couldn't prove the system was rigged against them. She adapted. That was what 7 years of undercover work had taught her. Environments changed, pressure points shifted, but the fundamental principle remained constant: gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, adjust your approach. The Ranger needed care. Caldwell had built a fence around that care. So Ashley would work within the fence while simultaneously documenting everything for the investigation. When the procurement system blocked her dressing order on Wednesday morning, she walked directly to the nursing supervisor's office and requested a meeting with Dr. Caldwell to discuss the Ranger's treatment plan. Formal. Professional. The words of a nurse who accepted the hierarchy and wanted collaboration, not a nurse who was threatened. She wrote it down in her shift notes, requested physician consultation on wound care protocol per new authorization requirements. The documentation was airtight. If this escalated, there would be a paper trail showing her attempting to work within the system, not fighting it. Caldwell approved her request at 11 a.m., but the approval came with conditions. She could order the materials, but only in consultation with him. He would be present for the wound irrigation at 2 p.m. Not a request. Not a collaboration. A command disguised as involvement. Ashley understood the subtext. He was going to watch her work, looking for errors. For overstepping. For anything he could weaponize. The challenge in his eyes during that cafeteria incident hadn't just been personal contempt. It had been operational. He was testing whether she had the discipline to be a threat. At 1:55 p.m., as Ashley was preparing the irrigation cart, a second memo came through from hospital administration. New policy, effective immediately, all patient rotation schedules were being restructured. Ashley's assignments to the Rangers unit would be reduced to weekends only, 8 a.m. to noon. 48 hours a week down to 8. The message came through her phone with a note from the supervisor. Dr. Caldwell requested this adjustment. Says it's to distribute experienced staff across all units more effectively. Ashley stared at the message for exactly 4 seconds. Then she set the phone down, returned to the irrigation cart, and continued organizing supplies with the same methodical precision she'd apply to any procedure. Her jaw tightened once. Just once. Then she was ready. Caldwell arrived at 1:59 p.m. with a second physician in tow, Dr. Whitmore from infectious disease, someone Ashley had seen around the hospital but never directly. The message was clear. Caldwell wasn't just supervising. He was building a witness to her work, someone who could validate his criticisms or contradict her competence. 2 against 1. Higher-ranking observers. The classic configuration for setting someone up for failure. Ashley, Caldwell said, stepping into the Rangers' room with the brightness of a man who'd already won. I wanted Dr. Whitmore to observe. Complex trauma cases benefit from multi-specialty input. She didn't respond to the subtext. She responded to the words. Of course. The Rangers' status improved overnight. Vital signs stable. Wound margin showing minimal necrotic tissue. I was planning to irrigate with normal saline and reassess for debridement. Show us, Whitmore said. Not unkindly, but with the careful distance of someone who didn't know her and had been brought in to evaluate. Ashley moved to the bedside with the kind of fluid efficiency that came from 1,000 procedures in hospitals and field stations across 2 continents. She unwrapped the dressing with practiced gentleness, revealing the wound, infection risk, but contained. She began the irrigation with steady hands, the saline running clear, then slightly cloudy, then clear again. Her movements had the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this enough times that technique had become pure muscle memory. What she noticed was that Caldwell wasn't actually watching the wound. He was watching her hands. Looking for tremor. Looking for hesitation. Looking for any sign that pressure was affecting her performance. Ashley kept her hands exactly where they were, steady as the cardiac monitoring equipment humming in the corner of the room. Steady as someone who'd held together trauma patients in combat zones where a single waver could cost a life. You've done this before, Whitmore observed. Not a question. Trained with good teachers, Ashley said, which was technically accurate and completely unhelpful to anyone trying to figure out where she'd been trained or under what circumstances. By 2:56 p.m., the irrigation was complete. The wound was clean. The Rangers' vital signs remained stable. Caldwell and Whitmore left without comment, but the damage was already done. Not to Ashley's work, that had been flawless, but to the structure of her coverage. The paperwork was in motion. The committees had been activated. The network of favors Caldwell had built over 15 years of kickback schemes with medical supply companies meant he had allies positioned throughout the hospital's administrative apparatus. For board members, Ashley learned later, had already received calls from Caldwell regarding credentialing concerns about newer staff. No names mentioned. Just general warnings about liability and the importance of verifying references. She found out about the credentialing investigation on Thursday when a woman in business attire appeared on the 4th floor asking nurses about her background. Where had Ashley studied? Could they verify her references? Were there any concerns about her clinical decision-making? The woman had an official hospital ID and a document that looked governmental, though Ashley recognized immediately that the paperwork was fraudulent, the formatting was subtly wrong, the seal was slightly off-register. Caldwell had hired someone to run a fake investigation, which meant he was running out of institutional tools and was moving toward desperate measures. That was the point where Ashley understood the full scope of what was happening. Caldwell hadn't just decided to remove her from the case. He'd decided to remove her from the hospital entirely. And he'd coordinated it through his network, the board members who owed him, the pharmaceutical representatives who depended on him, the administrators whose salaries were partially subsidized by his referral networks. He was moving fast because he sensed something, though Ashley knew he couldn't possibly understand what. He couldn't know she was federal. He couldn't know that every humiliation, every restriction, every fabricated investigation was being documented in real time through a secure server that was currently uploading to naval intelligence servers in Alexandria. The ranger called for her at 8 p.m. that Thursday night, and when she came to his room, he was sitting up in bed with his head tilted toward her voice. "Something's different," he said. "New dressing protocol," Ashley said, which wasn't a lie. "No. You're moving different. Like you're carrying something extra." The ranger had been trained in military reconnaissance. His blindness had only sharpened whatever observational instincts remained. "Like you're ready for something to break." Ashley settled into the chair beside his bed, her posture relaxed, her voice steady. "Just getting used to the rhythm of the unit." "Bullshit," the ranger said, but without accusation. "I've heard conversations. Caldwell's making calls. Nursing supervisors talking in the hallway about your schedule changing. You want to know what I think? I think someone doesn't like how well you're taking care of me." She didn't answer immediately. The room held only the soft percussion of the heart monitor and the distant hum of the hospital running through its evening protocols. Outside, Atlanta's July heat was beginning to break into the kind of thick, humid twilight that made the city feel like it was breathing. "I'm not going anywhere," Ashley said finally. The ranger nodded once, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "That's what I figured. You've got the same look my squad leader had." Right before everything got very quiet and very professional. What he didn't know was that Caldwell's moves, strategic as they were, had actually accelerated Ashley's timeline. The investigation was supposed to run for 8 weeks. Now it would need to close in 3. Because Caldwell was about to make a mistake that would justify bringing in federal oversight. And that mistake would come at 2:27 a.m. on a Monday night, when a heart stopped and Ashley would have to choose between maintaining her cover and saving a life. She had exactly 6 days to prepare for it. The alarm screamed at 2:56 a.m. Not the soft chime of a routine monitor alert. Not the measured beep that summoned nurses to check a medication line or adjust a blanket. This was the full-throated shriek of a cardiac monitor in crisis, the sound that turned every sleeping person on the 4th floor into a sprinter. Ashley jolted awake at the nurse's station, her hand already moving toward the call bell even before her eyes opened. 9 months of Navy training, 6 months of undercover placement, and pure muscle memory took over. She was moving. The ranger's room was dark except for the monitor's electric blue glow casting shadows across his face like a heartbeat made visible. The numbers told her everything in their terrible language: blood pressure 62/38 and dropping. Oxygen saturation 71. Heart rate climbing past 160, erratic, desperate, not the controlled response of a healthy heart but the fluttering panic of an organ drowning. His grey skin had taken on the waxy quality she'd seen only twice before, and both times the patient had coded within minutes. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his blind eyes wide with the animal terror of a body knowing it was dying. Ashley's hands moved before her mind caught up. "What's happening to me?" His voice cracked like fractured ice. "Fluid around your heart," she said, already reaching for the ultrasound machine at the bedside. The pericardium is filling. Your heart can't expand. She didn't tell him the rest, that his blood pressure was collapsing, that his heart was being crushed by its own protective sac like a fist closing around an egg. The ultrasound probe found the dark lake of fluid instantly, a pocket of blood compressing the ventricle, the ranger's heart forced smaller and smaller with each desperate beat. She grabbed the phone. Dialed. Dr. Hayes, the on-call cardiologist, answered on the third ring with the fog of sleep in his voice. This is Nurse Cooper at St. Michael's, 4th floor. Ranger patient, acute cardiac tamponade, heart rate 162, BP 62/38, O2 sat 71 and dropping. He's losing perfusion. The pause on the other end was telling. Where's Dr. Caldwell? Not available. You're the on-call cardio. Etta. 20 minutes. I'm coming from Buckhead. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. At this trajectory, the Ranger would arrest in 6. Ashley set the phone down with the exact same deliberation she'd used in Kandahar when an 88mm round took out half of Phi-Base's med tent. The fear was information. The urgency was fuel. I need you to stay absolutely still, she told the Ranger, her voice dropping into the flattened register of absolute authority that had no room for panic or hesitation. She moved to the supply cabinet and pulled an 18-gauge spinal needle, not the right instrument, but the only needle in the room with a gauge large enough to drain fluid fast enough to matter. The ultrasound probe stayed in her left hand, tracking the dark pocket of blood. Her right hand swabbed the Ranger's chest with iodine, the amber liquid darkening his skin, and she found the space between his ribs with the anatomical certainty of muscle memory from 1,000 training hours and 400 real procedures. The needle went through skin, through muscle, through the pericardial sac. The hiss of air escaping from a pressurized space. The needle tip found the fluid pocket, and suddenly the syringe was filling with blood the color of old pennies, 200 milliliters of it, the fluid that had been stealing his heart's ability to pump. With each milliliter drawn, the pressure inside his chest released. His gasping eased. The monitor's frantic climbing rate began to stabilize. O2 sat crept upward. 72, 76. 81, 85. His grey skin began to flush pink again, the color of a person still alive. By the time the syringe was empty, his heart rate had settled to 108. His blood pressure climbed to 78/44, still low but moving in the direction that meant survival. His blind eyes focused on where her voice had come from, and for the first time since the alarm, she heard him breathe like a man who wasn't drowning. You're okay, Ashley said quietly, removing the needle with the same smooth precision she'd used inserting it. The pressure is gone. Your heart can work now. What she couldn't see, was the nurse standing in the doorway. The nurse who'd applied for the trauma unit rotation and been passed over when Ashley had arrived. The nurse who'd whispered in the break room that the new hire was uppity, that she was overstepping, that she needed to be put in her place. That nurse had her phone out, the camera recording, capturing every movement of Ashley's hands, every beat of the Ranger's monitor as it climbed back toward normal, every moment of the procedure that looked like someone with military training saving a life. By 6:15 a.m., the video had already reached Dr. Caldwell's encrypted phone. He watched it twice in the darkness of his bedroom before the sun rose over Atlanta, his jaw clenching tighter with each viewing. The competence in her hands was undeniable. The technique was flawless. The outcome was the kind of save that would have made her famous in a normal hospital, but St. Michael's wasn't normal, and she was supposed to be disposable, just another floor nurse with a fake credential history and no real power. Instead, she'd just performed emergency medicine with the calm of someone who'd been trained for exactly this moment. He understood what he was looking at. He'd spent enough time around physicians to recognize surgical competence when he saw it, even if she'd been holding a needle instead of a scalpel. Worse, he understood the implications. That video wasn't evidence of her overreach, it was evidence of her skill. And skill was the one thing he couldn't afford to let the board see. By 7 a.m., he'd made 5 phone calls to people who owed him favors. By 7:53 a.m., the credentialing investigator had received a text message asking him to move up his timeline. By 8 a.m., 2 hospital security guards were being instructed to stand by in the administrative wing. By 8:15 a.m., Dr. Caldwell was walking through the hospital corridors with his jacket tailored to perfection and his smile sharp as a knife edge, already composing the language he'd used to describe credential fraud and scope of practice violations. He'd been right to see her as a threat. He'd just underestimated how quickly she'd show him exactly why. Ashley was checking the rangers for output when she heard the footsteps, too many of them, moving too deliberately for a normal morning round. Caldwell entered without knocking, and she knew by the precision of his entrance that something had shifted, that the game board had been reset and the pieces were no longer where she'd left them. Beside him walked a man in a blazer she didn't recognize and 2 hospital security officers whose faces were carefully neutral. "Nurse Cooper," Caldwell said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "You need to come with us immediately." The ranger's hand found hers, and she squeezed it once, just once, before releasing and standing. She didn't look back as she followed them through the corridors, didn't acknowledge the stares of staff members who'd already received the morning gossip about credential irregularities and false documentation. The walk to the administrator's office took 53 seconds, and in those seconds, Ashley ran through the calculations. She couldn't blow her cover. Revealing herself now would compromise naval intelligence operations across 3 states. But she also couldn't stay silent and let Caldwell bury her outside the hospital where her handler would find her useless. The credentialing investigator presented his findings with the confidence of a man who'd never had a patient care about his accuracy. Documentation irregularities on her Georgia Nursing Board certification. A reference phone number that disconnected when called. Dates that conflicted between her application and the state records he'd supposedly reviewed. Everything fabricated, everything intentional, everything designed to look like she'd lied her way into the hospital. "We have serious concerns about credential fraud," the investigator said, sliding papers across the desk. "Your references don't hold up." The patient was coding, Ashley said quietly, still standing because no one had offered her a chair. The on-call physician was 20 minutes away. Cardiac tamponade. He would have died. "Irrelevant," Caldwell said, and the word fell like a gavel. "You performed an invasive procedure without physician authorization. That constitutes practicing medicine without a license. Additionally, you falsified your credentials to gain employment at this hospital. Those are felonies, Nurse Cooper. Or whoever you actually are." She met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to show him she wasn't trembling, wasn't backing down, wasn't afraid of anything he could do in this room. Then she looked away, down at her hands, at the calluses on her palms that told the real story of who she was. Her left hand trembled slightly against her thigh, but only where no one could see it, only in the privacy of her own body where the fear was allowed to exist. "You're terminated effective immediately," Caldwell continued, savoring each word like poison on his tongue. "For credential falsification and scope of practice violations. Security will escort you from the building." Ashley stood, and as she stood, something in her expression closed off like a door locking. She walked between the security officers without looking at either of them, back through the corridors where the whispers had already started, past the ranger's room where she could have given him one last acknowledgement but didn't because it would have complicated things, out through the emergency department where she'd arrived 3 months ago with false credentials and true determination. The parking lot was empty except for her car. She sat in the driver's seat for 38 minutes, phone in hand, composing the failure report to her handler. Naval intelligence operations compromised. Cover intact but useless. Investigation terminated from inside. The billing fraud she'd been documenting, the kickback scheme with the medical supply company, the insurance fraud, the calculated rejection of every veteran's case that didn't pay enough, all of it would stay buried because she couldn't investigate from the outside and she couldn't blow her identity. At 3:36 p.m., she sat at her kitchen table still wearing the scrubs that smelled like the hospital, antiseptic and old coffee and the particular decay of a place where suffering happened daily. Her hands had stopped trembling somewhere around exit of the parking lot, but now they started again, and she couldn't stop them, and when her 14-year-old son came home from school and found her there with red eyes and shaking hands still in uniform, he stopped in the doorway. "Mom? Why are you home? What happened?" She couldn't explain. She couldn't tell him that she was a Master Chief Petty Officer with a Navy Cross and 2 Silver Stars, that she'd spent 13 years as a combat medic, that she'd held dying people together with her hands while explosions happened outside the tent. She couldn't tell him that sometimes the price of keeping secrets was sitting alone at a kitchen table at 3:33 in the afternoon while your hand shook and your son watched and you had absolutely no way to explain any of it. So she just shook her head and wrapped her arms around herself and let him see her break because he was her child and there were some things that didn't require words. The next morning at 9:15 a.m., Ashley sat in her car outside St. Michael's with her phone in hand and her handler's secured number waiting for her finger to press dial. The parking lot was the same grey concrete it had always been. The hospital loomed ahead, still indifferent to the lives it was saving and the ones it was destroying with equal institutional precision. Movement caught her eye. Her son, 15-year-old Marcus, was walking toward the hospital entrance carrying something rectangular and dark. A shadow box. Inside it, even from 50 yards away, she could see the glint of metal ribbons. She was out of the car in seconds, but he was already through the doors, already into the lobby, and his young voice carried across the marble floor with the kind of volume that stopped conversations. "My mom's a hero," he said. "She saved someone last night. You need to see these." The shadow box caught the light as he held it high. A Navy Cross hung at the center, flanked by 2 silver stars and ribbons that told the story of 13 years serving in silence. Staff members gathered, confusion rippling through the crowd. A woman at the information desk stood, mouth open. A security guard who'd served in Iraq saw the insignia and went rigid. The ranger, 4 floors up in room for 17, heard the word Navy and the sound of voices rising in the lobby. He reached for the phone beside his bed and dialed a number he'd memorized in Kandahar 7 years ago, a number he'd never forgotten, a number he'd promised himself he'd only call once, for something that mattered. 71 minutes later, the rotor wash of a Black Hawk helicopter thundered across the roof of St. Michael's. For naval intelligence investigators in dress uniforms moved through the corridors with the precision of a tactical operation, boots echoing on tile like a heartbeat-made manifest. Behind them walked Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper in wrinkled scrubs and a 2-star Navy general whose call sign had been redacted from every public record but whose presence commanded the absolute silence of institutional fear. True class is what you do when the lights go out. 7 in the morning. Rounds began at St. Michael's like they always did, nurses clustered around the central station, charts spread across the counter, coffee going cold in paper cups. Ashley moved through the ranger's vitals one more time. Oxygen saturation stable. Heart rate steady. The man slept with his head tilted toward the window, where early light was just beginning to touch the glass. Then the elevator doors opened. Dr. Caldwell walked out with 2 figures flanking him like bodyguards. One wore a visitor's badge and carried a manila folder thick with papers. The other was security. Ashley recognized the pattern immediately, the posture, the deliberate spacing, the way Caldwell's jaw had set into something that looked almost victorious. He'd been planning this. Possibly for days. He stopped at the nurse's station without looking at her. Spoke directly to the charge nurse, Patricia, who'd always been neutral territory between them. "I need to speak with Ashley Cooper." "Privately." "Administrative matter." Ashley's hands didn't stop moving. She finished documenting the ranger's morning assessment, blood pressure, temperature, medication times, all in precise notation. Only after she'd recorded the final number did she look up. "I'm here." Caldwell turned then. His smile had the quality of a blade reflecting sunlight, clean, dangerous, and entirely assured. "We've discovered documentation irregularities in your nursing license credentials. This is the investigator from the credentialing board." He gestured to the man with the folder. "He's been conducting a review of your background." The investigator stepped forward. He had the practiced expression of someone who'd done this 100 times, sympathetic but unmoved. Ms. Cooper, we received inquiries from your previous employer regarding inconsistencies in your application materials. Specifically, references to academic institutions and preceptor names that don't appear to match our records. Ashley had expected this. Known it was coming the moment she'd seen Caldwell's face change after the pericardiocentesis video circulated. The fabricated nursing school, created by naval intelligence and buried 3 layers deep in federal databases, would hold up under surface scrutiny. But Caldwell hadn't done surface scrutiny. He'd activated his network. Called in favors. Found someone willing to push harder than the average investigator would push. The problem was that pushing harder on a Navy ghost operation meant hitting classified walls. And once you hit those walls, you either stopped or you started documenting reasons to keep going. Caldwell had chosen to keep going. He'd created a paper trail now, evidence of questions asked, inquiries made. Which meant Ashley's cover wasn't just blown. It was becoming a federal record. Those references were part of my work history, Ashley said quietly. If there's a discrepancy, it should be directed to the institutions. The institutions don't exist, the investigator said, not unkindly. Not under those names. Not in those years. We have your original application materials from St. Michael's, a hiring file. The addresses, the dates, the phone numbers, they don't cross-reference with anything. No academic dean named in your credentials ever worked at any of those schools. Caldwell watched her face, waiting for it to crack. For the moment when she'd beg, or explain, or show him the fear he'd been counting on from day one. Ashley's hands were perfectly steady. I understand. What's the next step? The security guard stepped forward. Not threatening. Just present. The investigator looked uncomfortable now. He'd expected more resistance, more emotion, more something. Instead, he got a woman who nodded as if this made sense, as if getting fired for credential fraud was a reasonable Tuesday. Effective immediately, your access to patient care has been suspended pending investigation completion. You'll need to surrender your badge and ID. You're restricted from hospital premises except to retrieve personal items from your locker. That'll be done under supervision. 2 hours. That was how long it took to dismantle her mission. 2 hours from the investigator's opening statement to the plastic zip tie on the badge she'd worn for 3 months, to the empty locker smelling of antiseptic and her own sweat, to the security guard walking 3 feet behind her as she carried a paper box containing her stethoscope, her personal tablet, and nothing else that mattered. The real problem, the one that sat on her chest like a physical weight as she walked to the parking garage, was that you couldn't investigate a conspiracy if you weren't inside the institution. You couldn't document fraud if you didn't have access to the files. 8 years of Caldwell's billing patterns, his supply chain kickbacks, the network of doctors and administrators he'd cultivated across 3 states, all of it locked behind an access badge she no longer carried. And she couldn't blow her cover to stop him. Couldn't walk into that investigator's office and say, "My name is actually Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, Navy Intelligence, and Dr. Caldwell is running an $800,000 fraud scheme across a 12-hospital network." Because the moment she did, the multi-state investigation collapsed. Other institutions got spooked. Evidence disappeared. Caldwell's partners lawyered up and went quiet. And 15 indictments became 2 if they survived a defense attorney's motion to dismiss. Her mission parameters were absolute: stay undercover or let the bigger network burn. She'd already chosen to stay undercover. And now she couldn't stay. The drive home was done in silence. Ashley's apartment, the one she kept to cover for, on the south side near the VA clinic, smelled like the last 3 months of her life compressed into 800 square feet. Coffee maker. The fabric softener she used on her scrubs. Nothing personal because personal attachments got operatives killed. She sat at the kitchen table still wearing scrubs that marked her as someone who belonged inside a hospital. Red eyes had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with staring at computer screens for 48 hours straight while documenting every one of Caldwell's movements for a federal investigation that was now effectively dead. That was where her son found her at 4:30 in the afternoon. He was 14. Still wearing his school backpack. Still thinking his mother was a nurse named Ashley who worked nights and wore comfortable shoes and sometimes got frustrated with her boss. He stood in the kitchen doorway with the expression kids get when they know something is wrong but don't have the language for it yet. "Why are you home?" She couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't explain classified operations or undercover work, or that the federal investigation his mother had been running for 3 months had just evaporated because she couldn't maintain her cover and expose the conspiracy at the same time. Couldn't tell him that his mother was shaking not from fear but from the specific brand of rage that came from watching a criminal walk free because institutional protocols demanded she do nothing. "Work situation," she said. Her voice came out level. "Military controlled. It's being resolved." He sat down across from her. He had her eyes. Had her father's stubbornness. Had no idea what his mother actually did for a living, what she'd actually been trained for, what she was actually capable of when she stepped outside this small apartment and put on a different uniform. "Are you getting fired?" No. That much was true. You couldn't fire an undercover operative. You could burn her cover, which was worse, but technically her employment status didn't change. He studied her for a long moment, the way children do when they're trying to read a person instead of a surface. Then he left the kitchen. She heard him upstairs, moving around his room, the sounds of his 14-year-old life continuing regardless of classified intelligence operations and federal conspiracy. Ashley gripped the edge of the table. Held it. Concentrated on the sensation of wood under her palms and the fact that letting go didn't require the same amount of force as staying in control. Midnight came. 2 a.m. The kind of hours where the city sound stopped and nothing moved but the rhythm of Ashley's thinking, handler protocols, emergency contact procedures, the official language she'd need to use to admit that her operation had failed. She sat in her car in the St. Michael's parking lot at 6 the next morning. The hospital looked exactly like it had looked for 90 days. Beige walls behind the glass. Staff parking half full. The sun coming up over the emergency entrance like a normal Wednesday. Inside those walls, Dr. Caldwell was probably doing rounds. Probably telling residents about proper billing protocols. Probably utterly confident that the threat had been eliminated, the problem solved, the girl who was just a nurse fired and gone and no longer a concern. Ashley pulled out her phone. The secure line. The number that went somewhere in Arlington that didn't officially exist. Her handler would answer. She'd explain the situation in military brevity: operation compromised, cover blown, mission failure. The multi-state investigation would get reassigned. Caldwell's network would probably start destroying evidence the moment they realized the heat was actually off. But her hands didn't move toward the phone. Instead, she looked back at the hospital entrance. Watched a delivery van pull up. Watched a resident in a white coat hurry toward the ER. Watched the doors slide open and closed with the rhythm of ordinary Tuesday mornings. And then the passenger door opened. Her son stood there. 14 years old. Holding something wrapped in black fabric. His face had the expression of someone who'd made a decision and was now committed to it regardless of consequences. "Mom. You left this at the house." Ashley looked at what he was holding. Black velvet. The shape unmistakable. Inside was a shadow box. The kind sold at military supply stores. The kind that held medals and ribbons in precise alignment under glass. Every decoration she'd earned in 23 years. Every citation, every commendation, every piece of metal she'd refused to wear because they belonged to someone else, someone who operated in darkness where recognition didn't exist. Her son held it up to the window. Let the morning light catch the glass. "I looked up the medals online," he said. His voice was steady. 14 years old and reading his mother's combat record. Purple Heart. Silver Star. "I don't know what half this stuff means, but the internet says you're kind of a big deal." "Get in the car," she said. No. He was walking toward the hospital entrance. The shadow box held like a flag. His voice got louder. "No, actually. They need to see." They need to know who they're firing. From her vantage point in the car, Ashley watched her son walk through the automatic doors. Watched him stand in the lobby holding a shadow box. Watched the lobby security guard's face shift from confusion to understanding to sudden, absolute attention. Her phone buzzed before she could move. Blocked number. Arlington area code. Her handler's voice, filtered through encryption, coming from somewhere classified, said 5 words, "The Ranger just called Pentagon. Black Hawk ETA 12 minutes. Ashley sat in the car. Watched the rotor wash start across the morning sky before she could see the helicopter itself. Felt something like relief run through her shoulders, which meant she was still human enough to feel relief when a failed operation got a second chance at justice. She stepped out of the car. The doors of St. Michael's slid open in front of her. And this time, she walked through them not as Ashley, who wore scrubs and kept her head down. She walked through them as Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, with her cover officially shattered, her real identity about to walk into a conference room full of hospital executives and one Navy general whose call sign had been classified since 2001. The lobby went quiet. That specific kind of quiet that happens when an entire space realizes it has made a catastrophic miscalculation. Her son stood in the center of the floor holding a shadow box. A security guard was speaking into his radio. And somewhere behind those walls, in a hospital he'd thought was his fortress, Dr. Caldwell was about to learn what it meant to turn away the wrong person. Like this video if you think she made the right call. But was the punishment enough? Or did he deserve worse? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe and hit that bell.